Hi, everybody. This is Erica Meloe, and happy spring. A couple of housekeeping announcements before I delve into the description of this really interesting patient. Susan will be in London on Wednesday, April 24th at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital on Fulham Road in London, talking about assessing and managing the connections from the glottis to the pelvis. And it's from 6 to 8:30 p.m. So for all of our UK listeners out there, if you are free that evening, you absolutely must go. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Susan directly. Also, my book, Why Do I Hurt? Discover the Surprising Connections That Cause Physical Pain and What to Do About Them. Finally, my ebook will be ready. It's amazing the difference that you need to address when you're going from a paperback to an ebook. So that will be coming out in the next week or so. So look for that. And also, we're really trying to get up to 100 reviews on iTunes. So if you really enjoy the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could just leave a review. It could be literally 3 words or 2 words. It would really mean a lot to us. So in this episode, Susan and I discuss a patient of mine. She's a professional dancer here in New York. Not so much a ballet dancer, but she has that classical training. She was performing in an opera when I treated her, suffering from long-standing pelvic girdle pain and was getting her SI joint manipulated all the time and getting this short-term relief. And at the end of the day, it was just not helping anymore. So when I ended up evaluating her for the first time, it was really interesting to see where her source of the problem was. She had a couple drivers to her issue, but the main one was not in the pelvis. Not surprising. And my question to you as a listener, if the patient has symptoms in the pelvis, but the source is somewhere else, how do you exercise them? Same thing. If you have another patient who has knee pain, but the source is in their foot, how do you exercise them? You certainly have to address their driver, right? If the source is the foot, you need to exercise the foot. So you can listen and hopefully you can learn a few things. And thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Enjoy.
This is 44.
44. We're tough to treat. And I think we should just get into it because I've got a really interesting patient. And so it's 44 episodes. We're going to have to do something for 50, Susan, I think, when we hit 50 episodes.
I think so.
To do a
we'll definitely
one.
Plan it. Stay tuned, everyone. Something fun coming up for episode number 50.
50. Okie dokie. This patient of mine, so I've actually treated her, discharged her, but I thought I would share her because she's quite interesting in the sense that she was her exercise progression I thought was quite interesting. And she came to me from a chiropractor here in New York who referred her to me for just another set of eyes, a second opinion type of thing. And she's a dancer, a professional dancer, and modern, pretty much, dances with a modern dance company here in New York. And her main issue was I'm going to quote her, left SI joint pain, left pelvic pain, and she was pointing to the area of the left PSIS and the lower left lumbar spine. And then she said that it felt, quote unquote, jammed and it was getting stuck all the time. Hence the visit to the chiropractor who kept manipulating her and gave her short-term relief. But at the end of the day, it wasn't giving her the long-term relief that she needed. And I think that ultimately, when you're doing something like that and it keeps coming back, it's some strategy or something's off. So that's her history. So I said she was a modern dancer. When I saw her, she was performing in an opera, and I'll have to explain this. In this opera, she had to do a few positions. One was where she was in a sitting position on the ground with both of her knees off of the floor. Right, in sort of like you're sitting holding a medicine ball, although she wasn't holding a medicine ball, and her knees were off the ground and they were a bit rotated to the right. So she was constantly contracting her abdominals, her obliques, probably breath holding for a fair bit of time. in that performance. And she also, her background, also she's a part-time Pilates instructor, as I think a lot of dancers are. So she'd been dancing for quite some time. She probably was in her late 20s, early 30s when I saw her. So her main issue, as I mentioned, was the left SI joint pain, lower lumbar, when she performed an arabesque. So she'd get up on that on point on that right leg. For people who don't know what that is, she would kick that left leg back, the right arm would go up, and the left arm would go back. So she'd be in that arabesque position. And that's when she complained of her symptoms: jammed, stuck, things like that. All other issues in terms of walking, standing, sitting, dancing, that was the only issues when she had to really kick that left leg back. So what I thought at the beginning, and I think with her, is just based on the history alone, the fact that she had to sit in that position, Susan, for so long, it's got to be a problem, right? I mean, it's a continual abdominal workout, literally, for how many performances. So that was her main issue. Past medical history, no major illnesses, falls. Yes, she had a lot of other injuries because she's a dancer, mostly in her feet. Okay, also quite common. So based on that, I said to myself, well, I'm looking at the arabesque position. I'm actually doing it. If she's sitting in this sort of crunch position with her knees off the ground, how can she elongate in the front of her trunk, right?
Mm-hmm.
She can't. And then she ended up, my thought process before even seeing her stand or getting my hands on her was that she couldn't elongate in the front of her trunk, and she could not kick that left leg back, or she had to. So she ended up jamming, and she tried to get that hip extension that all dancers need, and she couldn't get it from the front and from her hip and from her, from the elongation of the hip flexors. So she just jammed on her left side. So I don't know what I'll stop there before I go on. I don't know what you think about that, but that's what I thought based on just the history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that, how long has she been working in the opera doing that particular position on stage? Is this
for a while. Is this
a daily thing?
Yeah, so for a couple of months at that point.
Did things get worse as she started doing that? Or had this been going on for a very long time?
No, it got worse when she was doing the opera. Yeah.
So that chronic postural positioning for long periods of time just took her over the edge, it sounds like.
Correct. So she had intermittent foot issues, but she treated them, and that was the persistent issue. But the fact that she saw the chiropractor was because of this opera. So it was like a 3-month opera, like a short thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, what I was explaining to her before I looked, I said, look, you may feel better when you get manipulated, but if you're resorting to the same strategy, or if you've got certain muscular restrictions in the front of your abdomen or movement pattern restrictions, you're going to run out of options. And you're a dancer, and you can compensate for so long, but compensations generally come with a price, especially if you're loading your system every day in that same position. So what I did was, because I tend to sort of just kind of go for what really, I look at the movement pattern that bothers them. I looked at her, I took a look at her in standing, and then I took a look at her in the arabesque position. So I'll briefly, in standing, I didn't see a lot. I basically saw your obvious, rotation to the left in the pelvis and the compensatory rotation in the thorax to the right. Chicken or egg, who knows, who cares, doesn't matter. It basically was how she moved.
What it is.
Exactly. So what I did was, instead, and this is what, for the listeners, I could have broken this down, but because I feel confident at this point in assessing the full arabesque position, I assessed that. But what I could have done, just for the listeners, I could have had her stand on her right leg and looked at it, because that was breaking down the movement pattern. I could have had her stand on one leg and do a heel raise on her right side. I could have had her stand and just do standing left hip extension. Then I could have had her do left hip extension and raise that right arm, just breaking down the movement pattern instead of going into the full-blown arabesque. So, and sometimes I will break down the movement pattern if it's difficult for me to see or feel what the problem is in her meaningful activity, and her meaningful activity or meaningful movement was the arabesque. So if listeners, you don't have to like assess the whole movement pattern, you can break that down, and you can do that with anything. So I just wanted to add that. So basically, she did the arabesque, and she hiked that left hip up, and then she complained of jamming, of course, right? So the main thing that I saw was she hiked the left hip up, and her weight shifted all the way to her right leg. That's supposed to happen, right? I mean, you get on your right leg, it shifts over.
Yep.
She was going way right. And I'm like, how are you going to stand? And so she's so flexible and she could compensate. What she ended up doing was she ended up shifting her thorax, and trying to get the control back, basically to center via her thoracic spine. So she did the arabesque and she shifted way to the right, but then she did this funky thing with her trunk and got herself back to center. And that's when she was jamming on her,
okay.
So I'm going to stop there and let me know if you have any questions or any thoughts at this point. Are you good so far?
I am. Did you take a look at her feet?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Going into that. Okay.
Yes, I did
Here we
do that. So I basically did. I said just do a bilateral heel raise. I just did that at first because because she has a history of foot issues, and her right foot was really rigid, that supinated, externally rotated, navicular, gripping, the whole 9 yards. And I will tell you that her foot was a secondary issue. I'm not going to so much talk about that today, but her foot was definitely a secondary issue for her.
Okay.
So both feet, even though that left foot was in the air, because that her meaningful movement was arabesque, the left foot was in the air, you still could have an issue with the foot that could affect it, even though it's non-weight bearing. But her right foot was gripping like crazy, once again, trying to stabilize her on that right side. And for sure, and I ended up treating the foot, but it was secondary. And I do agree. I think that in standing, especially for movement patterns that start in standing, and especially when you're going into that heel raise, the foot definitely becomes a player. It may not become a primary player, or it may be a co-player, but I believe that it is a player, whether it's 30% or 80% or whatever percent, right, with dancers. So what I ended up doing is I had her repeat the arabesque, and I saw this significant shift in the hip hike, and because because I saw all this funky stuff going on in her thorax, for lack of a medically better terminology, lack of control in the thorax, I went in and like I've done before, I just went in and I slowly, you can call it whatever you want, entered their nervous system, gave them a better movement pattern, gave them some decompression, whatever. I put my hands on her and I literally just I didn't hold her. All I did was basically just try with my fingers, literally just decompress middle rib 6, 7, pretty much around that area, more on the right, to try to center her. And then I waited. And I did that in standing before she did the arabesque. Okay. And then I looked down at the pelvis. I looked up at the head. I looked at the feet just to make sure nothing was getting worse. And her pelvis was pretty okay. Her foot was not changed at all, which indicated to me that probably her foot was definitely a secondary issue. So she felt okay, because sometimes, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I've gotten into people's thoraxes, and especially dancers, and they faint or they're dizzy, and I had one pass out on me. So with dancers especially, when I get my hands in their thoracic, I wait. And I look at their breathing. I make sure they're not hyperventilating or anything. And she was good. So she did the arabesque and she was pain-free. So I said, okay, maybe it's some issue with your thorax. So I'm going to stop there and let me know if you have any questions. Or
taking it back a step, did you look at her in standing with extension or side bending, or you just went straight to arabesque?
I went straight to
okay.
No, Susan. I looked at her in lumbar extension.
Okay.
Sorry, I failed to mention
and
that.
Did she have issues in just going into extension?
Yes.
Did she move over to the right when she went into extension?
Yeah. So she went into extension and she shifted to the right. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So that movement pattern was that's good. I would have started there. Yep. Just to kind of get an idea of, was it a closing type of issue, a compression issue, or was it an opening issue? What was it that was like maybe causing some of the movement changes and the movement pattern issues? When I'm I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing the extension piece, and then I'm trying to take this back into that sitting posture. And I love the way that you were kind of looked at her movement and how her thorax was going in one direction, her pelvis going kind of in another direction, so to speak. They were just moving differently because she was really overcompensating by going too far to the right. But in the sitting position, she was in, probably some trunk extension, but we're kind of more in, hip flexion at that point. But that she was, her legs were over to the right, which would be opposite of what she would be doing in the arabesque. So she was really gripping with her abs to hold her and hold her knees over to that position. I'm just kind of trying to tie those two things together. But it sounds like that the floor coming from the ground up into her pelvis was probably creating the compression, because as the knees were going right, her trunk was probably twisting somewhat to the left.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, I'm just kind of thinking about that and just kind of going, okay, so we can have two different one was an active movement, the other one was a static positioning. But both of them in their similar ways were creating a lot of compression through that area.
Yes, good point. So with her, because of the breath holding and the gripping in the front, and because a lot of those muscles, especially the obliques, they attach into the rib cage, I felt that she literally had a significantly overactive abdominal pattern, and that was causing her to it reinforced a poor movement strategy, right? So every time she did any movement pattern out of that sitting and, sitting with her knees off the ground position, any kind of elongation, she couldn't elongate from the abdominal. She could not, it was so restricted. It kept pulling her into that compressive, but more of a flexion pattern. And I felt that because that attached to the ribs, and I've seen this before, especially with, also with the diaphragm, that it will cause a lack of movement control in the thorax. And when I did test her thoracic rotation in sitting, it was restricted. No surprise. She can't elongate. But I did test the lumbar extension. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. But but you would think, because they're two different movement patterns. I agree.
Right.
I agree.
So I was looking for the similarity between the two, and for me, the similarity started to come up as like, okay, this system is just not happy with compression on that side for whatever reason.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And I did test her in prone hip extension just to see what would happen in that unloaded position.
Oh, okay, great. And
it's same thing happened. She had symptoms, and you could see on the table she was trying to bear down with the thorax, and she couldn't do it. So I figured she can't do it loaded, she can't do it unloaded, and she can't extend her lumbar spine. So that was consistent.
Okay.
So the only area that I thought, because in an arabesque or for any dance, you literally have to be pretty. You've got to be able to what's the word? Call in everything when you're doing these types of high load activities. Right. And with her in the opera, she did have to do a little bit of the arabesque. She had to do a lot of different things, to be honest. The movement pattern that she did a lot of was that sitting. And that was the first thing that came out of her mouth when I saw her on the first day.
That was important to her.
Yeah. So I felt that from a muscular, like she thought she had a disc issue. I'm like, no, you don't have a disc issue. I think ultimately, it was a muscular restriction in the front of her trunk causing a loss of control in the thorax, which basically caused her to jam on her left side in her SI joint. I did check the slump, and I did check just straight leg raise and things like that. That was, completely not, it was normal, nothing, and I didn't expect it, to be honest. So the main issues, the main sort of provocative positions were, besides her meaningful movement of arabesque, was lumbar extension, prone hip extension, and thoracic rotation was limited. Okay. So what I ended up, the intervention I did because she was a Pilates instructor, I knew I would be able to give her things to do on the Pilates equipment that she would do on her own as well. So what I ended up doing, since I got the most bang for my buck with modifying her thorax, although it did not correct her foot, I decided in the first session, I was going to do a very sort of quick, we call it release with awareness, of her external obliques. I got my hands in there and I tried and I released. And for the listeners, I did go in and assess. I did her, just so you know, I did assess her passive accessory vertebral mobility. I did that in prone when I had her in prone hip extension position. I did assess lumbar mobility. It was pretty normal. She did feel very jammed on that left side, so I did that, and that was not relevant. And I turned her over, and then I did assess the soft tissue in the front. And it was all typical. I assessed her breathing. I had her do a diaphragmatic breath, lateral costal breath, upper chest breath. It was all restricted, as that's your thing. I mean, it was just, she was not breathing into her rib cage at all. So what I did is I did some release work just into the internal and external obliques, and it took maybe 5 minutes. Then I actually had her do some breath work. So I had her in supine, hook lying, knees flexed, got to the head of the table, got my hands on the ribs that I felt or on the rib cage, and then I did a little decompression. I had her do a breath. I had her do 3 types of breath: the diaphragmatic breath, the lateral costal breath, and the upper chest breath. And whatever breath I felt pulled more,
or
got more expansion there,
Mm-hmm.
I used. And with her, it was the diaphragmatic breath. So I had her do 3 diaphragmatic breaths, and then she just did some lower trunk rotation.
I love that, because that fits really right in with what you were seeing clinically in her movement pattern, is with her breath holding. So if they're breath holding and they're having lumbar pain, we do know that from an article in 2012 by Kohler, that the movement pattern of the diaphragm actually changes in with extremity motion with back pain. It does. It has less excursion and it has less thickening. And as far as like activation, when you're challenging the extremities in somebody with back pain versus somebody without.
That's right.
And so that's amazing. And I love that. And I love the way you brought rotation in. Rotation. I say it 1,000 times a day. Is so important for diaphragm muscles. And she was already, cueing herself and spending a lot of time rotating in a direction that she could actually move better in, because trying to go the other way wasn't working so well for her, and she was getting a pain response every time she did it. So of course she was moving out of there. And it was great to get your hands on the trunk and change the trunk to actually change what was happening in the lumbar spine, especially when you went in and did the intervertebral passive movements. And it really wasn't like, there wasn't a lot of muscle guarding. It wasn't being held, like you were expecting to probably see. I would have expected it to like really not want to open and flex a little bit, but that wasn't the issue. So something else, there was another driver going on, and that just confirmed your reasoning for getting right into the thorax, even though you needed to do something different with the foot down the road. What you had to do was get her out of this cycle first, I think. And this was your best bang for the buck. And I love the idea of thinking about different breaths. What makes her feel better? What makes her move differently? And, it just kind of fits right into that breath holding pattern, because you don't know why they may be holding their breath, but generally they do as a response to the pain, So when we hurt, we tend to hold our breath.
Yeah, you've mentioned that article before by Kohler. I actually have to get that, because that's great stuff.
Yeah, it was in JOSPT 2012.
Okay.
KOHLER.
KOHLER. Okay, perfect. Awesome. So yeah, no, I agree. I love the breath. So, and with her, so what I ended up doing is I had her put her thumbs on I said, go on the bumpy part of your ribs. That's the way that they'll understand it. And so what she did was, and she felt that she was pretty sore, as a lot of us are. And I just had her just lift, like just do a little decompression, and then repeat the breath at home, and then do the lower trunk rotation at home. So I gave her that as sort of like a home program. And then I also, no surprise here, I did tape her. So I taped her left side of her thorax, because it was just completely, what's the word? You would have thought that I would have been from people who know me know I tape a lot in the thorax, but from the way she was moving, you would have thought that I would have needed to control that right side. And I did try that, but that did not work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, because I taped her right rib 7 and I retested things, no different. I went into her left side. So this was after the external oblique release. After the stack and breathe, she was a lot better, but she was still getting that jamming. And then I said, let me tape your right side. No better. I ended up going to her left side, and there was some significant hypertonicity and a little bit of a control issue on that rib, on that the sixth rib on the left. So I went in and I taped that. That was it. That she was pain free with that. I don't know why to this day the left side helped, but all I know is that her nervous system said, yes, I'm good.
She didn't like compression there. So, the tape was a sensory awareness piece to just change the movement pattern.
Correct.
As we've talked about many times, with taping, that it's, you're basically putting different input into the sensory system. Correct. And letting the sensory system figure out the movement pattern that goes along with that. And, you got to play around with it. I love it because, sometimes what you think may work doesn't work. And, but how else can we do it so it will give her that cue? Because you're not going to go home with her with your hands on her back. That'd be great. Or she's not going to walk around with her hands on her back all the time too. What you're after is really getting that diaphragm moving and getting those muscles to react differently, and that sensory cue is a good one.
Yep, I know the last thing I needed was her to come back with arm pain on the right side, or and I do believe, and I do leave time at the end to reassess a few things, and taping. So basically, I taped the left side, gave her we call it stack and breathe. I gave her that, and then I did the hands-on release. So then I said, while you're home, a good decompressive pose for the thorax is child's pose, down dog. So I gave her those two as well. So she did the breath work, she had the tape on, and then she did the down dog and child's pose to sort of decompress. And then she, sort of went on her merry way. What I did also was in that session, just looking at my notes, I gave her some mental imagery, some cueing for her when she does the down dog, when she does the stack and breathe or the child's pose. I just said, imagine you have balloons in your armpits. We started off with imagine you have space in your armpits. That didn't really work. So I said, imagine you have balloons in your armpits and then do your lower trunk rotation. And she felt a lot better when she did that cue. So she went home. So when she did the child's pose and down dog, that's the cueing that she did. So I sent her on her way. She was still working at this time, so I was trying to get an intervention done quickly because she was still in the op. It's not like she could leave, to be honest.
Yeah, you don't walk away from a paying job.
Exactly. And this could quickly turn into a workman's comp situation, which she did not want to have. So, and I explained to her that, if you want to have you can have your SI joint manipulated, but ultimately it's not the cause of the problem, and don't waste your money and such. So, and she ended up not going back to the chiropractor because it was just a travel issue as well, and she did get some good results with the tape. So I saw her. I'm going to quickly fast forward because I want to just talk about her exercise progression, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this patient.
Okay.
So, so she came back and, she was doing well. Okay. She did well. The taping, the breath work, the release work did pretty well. So what I thought about with her exercise program, because the thorax was the main issue, I geared a lot of the exercises towards that. Did I have her do prone hip extension, standing hip extension? Not at the beginning, because that was not how that doesn't affect the thorax. The thorax is, the main issue is rotation. So, a rotary movement or a side step or a side lunge would be kind of challenging for the thorax. Okay, so this is what I ended up doing so we went along for a bit with that, doing well. I gave her some initial, these are my go-tos for the thorax, like tricep extensions, reverse flies, because those in an unloaded position, supine, knees flexed, just to see if she could control that movement in the sagittal plane with low weight. And she was able to do that. So that's what I gave her after those initial sessions. So, and I was still taping her. So the child's pose, down dog, all the breath work were like her resets, like we called it, like her resets. That sort of reset her system after a performance when it was bothering her. And then she was able to self-tape her. She had one of her colleagues tape her. We videoed it for her. So, because that really helped her. So then what I ended up doing was, because she's a Pilates instructor, I said, look, you can do a lot of things on the Cadillac, like seated roll downs, seated push throughs, things like that are pretty straight plane, that open up the thorax, that decompress you, and you can do that on your own. And she did. So what I ended up doing after those initial phase 1, initial down dog, child's pose, stack and breathing, things like that, reverse flies, skull crushers, I ended up starting to move her into, had her do a one-legged bridge, just because I wanted to see if she could control that one-legged bridges are hard. They're really hard.
They are.
They really are. I mean, I think it's either harder than standing. So I started her there, and then you could see when she did that, she really couldn't control that, because that's the hard position. So I had to give her more mental imagery and cueing, and she still needed to be taped when she did an exercise like that.
Did she have more trouble, just out of curiosity, with the one-legged bridge with the right foot being down versus the left foot being down?
She had,
because it was on the right foot for the arabesque.
For the
right?
arabesque,
yeah,
correct. She had both, but her right was worse.
Okay.
Yeah, she had both issues. It's interesting because I forgot to mention, I wrote this down. She went to a bar class after one of our sessions, and she was taped and good. And she said her lower extremities were shaking so badly. They were so weak. She had no idea how weak she was. I said, yeah, I took away your compensation. When you take away someone's compensation, the reality unfolds. It's like, right? She's like, Erica, I was shaking so badly. I couldn't believe it. I was so weak. I'm like, yeah.
Not weak, just little new coordination patterns that your brain wasn't used to challenging. Yeah.
Exactly.
And a bar class can be pretty darn challenging. So,
right? And I said, you're a dancer. You're not really weak. You can compensate really well until you run out of options. And you're right. I like that coordination. I got to use that more often, because people just say, oh, I'm weak. I'm like, you're really not weak. No, you don't have frank weakness.
It's a new pattern.
Right. Exactly.
And it just takes time to challenge the new pattern,
Exactly.
Which is what you were doing basically with her exercises, is bringing her back down to a level where you could start challenging the new pattern to get her to re-coordinate her trunk muscles and how they were performing, and not breath holding and doing that kind of stuff. I love the one-legged bridge with her, especially because you had mentioned the foot problem. Yes. That her foot was, she had some foot injuries. So you're connecting the foot to the body.
Yep.
With some of those things purposely.
Correct.
Not just like, okay, it's a great exercise to do. It's like there was purpose behind,
correct.
The progression here. All right. So then what'd you do?
Yeah, so then basically I said if you don't have access to your Pilates equipment, you could always just do some sitting thoracic extension, flexion, but she did. So for listeners who don't have Pilates, you could do that. So then I basically had her, I got her up in standing. This is a few sessions down the line, still being taped, okay? Dancers love to be taped. I don't know why, but they do. It's just like they love that input. So I literally had her in standing, feet on the ground first. I'm just demoing this. I had her literally stand facing a wall, a fair distance away, and I had her do wall lands. Like she lands like this, almost like in a plank position on the wall, to control the thoracic.
Uh-huh.
So I had her stand, and I had her do that. So she did, I don't know, for the one session.
It's kind of like standing wall burpees.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. So her arms are coming up, and then she's landing and holding. Uh-huh. Then I had her do that in the releve, in like heel raise, and do the same thing. So that's how I progressed that. So I was trying to break it down with her to the meaningful movement. So
right,
standing, so still not rotating yet. I'm getting there. So I had her standing wall lands, and I had her do standing wall lands with heel raises. And that's hard for a lot of people who have issues in their thorax. It's hard for most people. They can control it, but they're always compensating somewhere else. I could have had her do, which I didn't, just so the listeners, I could have had her do heel raises with a single arm lift. That would that would mimic the arabesque. I did not, but I could have done that. Okay. There's just so much you can do, and kind of have to pick and choose. If she wanted to do it on her Pilates equipment, she could have done a 4-point kneel on the reformer or something, but that would have been really hard. So then I had her do that for a bit. Then I moved into rotation. Okay, so I felt like because of the lack of control in the thorax, I needed to go through some of these progressions in the beginning in an unloaded position to see if she could control it, because she wasn't controlling it in her prone hip extension position, I'll tell you that.
Right.
She was not. So I needed to get her control in an unloaded position first, and then sort of start to challenge her system. And once again, she was working and she was challenging her system every day. And, we kept up with her, with the breath and the lower trunk rotation. That was pretty much every day, or child's pose or down dog. That was pretty much her mainstay, because you're sitting in that position in the opera and you're still contracting your abdominal muscles. It's the same thing. You're doing the same thing over again.
Right.
It's not like she's an office worker and I can say, well, you need to move your chair now, this position. She couldn't do any of that. She had to do this. So what I ended up doing is I had her get into a high kneel, like almost like a half kneel, like a lunge, but you're on the floor. So your one leg is in front, the right leg in front, the left leg behind.
Okay.
And then I had her do like a small weight. You could do TheraBand as well. So in that lunge position on the ground, right leg in front, left leg back, I had her do rotation. So I just had her do, I had her take the weight in one hand first, and I had her do rotation to the right, rotation to the left. Then I had her do one arm, lift, and then rotate, because the arabesque is more like,
right. Yeah, but it's a combination.
Exactly. So I had her do that with like a 2-pound weight, and she was okay in that half kneel, or the whatever you want to call it, position. And
which is cool, because it's still a relatively open position for the lumbar spine, and you're challenging the trunk, to be able to move over this, basically kind of open position. So you're not taking her into that closing down compression, but you're actually loading through all the limbs, which I think is fantastic, because she's getting a richness, a variety of movements of different types of control, which is going to feed into the ultimate pattern that you're really wanting her to be able to do without that pain experience. Right. So you're doing bits and pieces of different things that she does in that movement pattern that gave her the pain experience, but you're challenging it and strengthening it in many different ways, so that her system has a lot more variance, I think. It sounds really cool. I love that you did stuff in standing, you did stuff in 4-point, you did stuff this way on her back, different positions and stuff but they all had some characteristic of the movement pattern in it as you move forward.
Exactly. And with that left leg being back, that would challenge that compression. Absolutely. So that's what we did. She did that for a bit, and then she was still doing her Pilates roll downs, and people love those things, and ultimately it makes them feel better. Then what we ended up doing in the end, I had her go into full down dog, and kick that left leg back. I'm like, if she can get into full down dog with that decompressed thorax and kick that left leg back and be pain-free without tape, then we're good. So, and I'm reassessing, obviously, as we're doing this. So that,
an upside down arabesque.
Exactly. I think, if we, as physical therapists, if we just analyze movement patterns really specifically, for me, I love this stuff. So for me, I felt that the movement pattern, breaking that movement pattern down and tailoring that movement pattern breakdown into her exercise program, rather than just having her do willy-nilly, glute exercises or clamshells or it's just not going to help her. So if you can break down a complicated movement pattern like an arabesque and train the driver in different functional positions related to that movement pattern, then you should really clear everything out of the system, right? And that does challenge her foot, and I'll get into that in just 2 seconds. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the foot, because it really, working on her thorax really got her 90-80%, to be really honest. So we did the down dog with her left leg back, and we once again, I mentioned the cueing at the beginning. She kept cueing herself until it became routine. She kept doing the mental imagery. There's actually a really good book, and I'm just looking at it there's a book by, I think, Eric Frankel, called Dynamic Alignment Through Imagery. And that's a lot of
Eric Franklin,
Eric Franklin. That's it.
Yeah. Because I was thinking of Eric Franklin when he did the holding the balloons under the arms. I mean, that's a visual that he would, he uses a lot of movement imagery,
right,
to get people to change their movement patterns. Mm-hmm.
Totally, yeah. So dynamic alignment through imagery. It's a great book, and so I did a lot of imagery with her throughout. And dancers get it; they're good. They understand it. So she did a lot of that, and then she also took the stuff we did on the floor into her Pilates equipment, and then she did some things in standing, and ultimately with that movement progression, some sagittal plane. And people who know me tend to. I push rotation fairly quickly. However, with her, I felt that because she was a dancer, because she had significant loss of control, I felt that we needed to really to do straight plane work with her and load that system and see if she could load her leg that way without introducing rotation so right away. So, because that's a especially because the thorax is so sensitive to rotation. Could I have done standing side lunges with rotation? Absolutely. I did not with her. I didn't feel it was so relevant to her movement pattern, but you absolutely could have done things like that. Especially when there's a foot problem, lateral lunges challenge that foot fairly well. And that's also a challenge for the thorax. So I think that would have been a high level exercise for someone like her, and I could have done it. But I felt that I needed to get the arms involved with the arabesque and the whole 9 yards. So that's what I did. And I pretty much stopped there in terms of thoracic work. We would add some TheraBand, we would add some weight.
Mm-hmm.
She had a fairly comprehensive program, and once again, she did a lot of work on her own in on the equipment. And with regards to her foot, so briefly, when she was probably mid phase 2 exercises, when she was not doing the rotation, I noticed that her foot was really not changing. So when she did the arabesque, she had very little pain, even though the person has very little pain, and I think the foot's relevant. Her foot was still gripping, and she kept saying, "Yeah, it is still gripping." So, in her mind now, she's like, "Oh, great, I have a foot problem." I'm like, no, you don't have a foot problem. It's just, it's. I don't like patients to think they've got a bazillion problems when it's their left side of her pelvis. That's the issue. And so I did a little work in there, manual work. I've talked about this on the podcast before, so I'm not going to rehash it. I did not do any taping, none of that. All I did was just some intervention manually, little calcaneal distraction, did some release work at the bottom of her foot, had her do some imagery, splaying, feel your feet rooted to the ground type of thing. And then when I incorporated the down dog and like the high kneeling, things like that, that's when she started to feel the foot loosen up. So I didn't spend a ton of time with the foot. So I don't want the listeners to think I did, because I did not. But because her nervous system is so plastic, she got it very quickly, and she was able to incorporate a lot of those changes very easily. I think that if I started working on the foot at the beginning, I think it really would have confused her system. I don't know what you think about that, but I
think it's great. She was getting better. She was doing all the stuff. She felt good. How did she feel in the opera?
Great.
Yeah,
much better.
If she was feeling better, moving better, breathing, I'm all in. At some point you just have to say, just let the system go be its free and happy, lovely self. And, we don't have to, not every little thing has to be a certain way. She has made so many changes, and they were all for the positive, and she was all in and doing a lot of other stuff around it that obviously that she liked to do, or she wouldn't have done them. And, the end game is that she felt better. She could move better. She could move easier. She wasn't feeling like she needed to go and get unjammed all the time. And to me, that's kind of when you just say, I just kind of like peace out,
I know.
Go be your free, lovely neurological system, and, and explore the wonders of movement that you have available to you now, because of the variance that, she was able to put back into her system. And all you did was just challenge those new coordination patterns, and let her begin to really explore. Can I move without breath holding? Can I move without sticking my thorax, to the, with sticky glue in order to be able to do anything? And, and she noticed that when it was problematic, and it really kind of helped her begin to say, oh, I need to kind of maybe work this way a little bit more and this way a little bit more. And, you just encourage that, like all these movements are important, but they're also important to do in a whole bunch of different ways, especially if she has to get on the floor, off the floor, move around on the floor. I mean, her occupation and who she is and what she does. So that's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, and I think that the exercise progression, I did do a fair bit with her. Sometimes less is more, but I think because of the nature of her performance, I felt that I needed to push through a bunch of these things with her. Some people I wouldn't have done as much, but I think with her, we need to make a clinical reason. We need to make an executive decision on what you're going to introduce in the program. And some people just will be like, I'm not interested in this. But because of the demands of her job, I felt I needed to do it. So no, she was good. She's no longer doing that opera, and this is a couple years ago, and she's dancing and doing pretty okay. So
that's great.
Yeah, and I felt that this was a good one to do just because of the nature of her symptoms and also just the exercise progression. And I don't want listeners to think I just looked at arabesque, because I didn't, but that was the main thing I was leading up towards in the evaluation, because that was the only thing that bothered her. Everything else was fine.
Needed but that's a key movement for her.
Yeah.
So, and it was changing some of her other patterns. Yeah. Because of that. And so I think you have to find what's the irritable piece. Yeah. You have to. Yeah. Because otherwise it doesn't have any meaning. Right. For her, you got right into what had meaning for her. So you had the buy-in right away. She's like, this person really wants to, I have confidence that this person is going to help me change so I can do this motor pattern or this arabesque or whatever and feel better.
Yes, and
if you never looked at that, she'd be like, okay, whatever. Why am I doing this? So my back hurts when I lean sideways. Who cares?
Who cares? Exactly.
Right? That doesn't bother. I don't ever lean sideways. What I do is I do this.
Exactly.
Are you going to fix this? Are you going to help me get better with this? Or what that kind of piece. And I think that's the why. The why are you here? How you do it is going to maybe differ between you and I, but the why she was there was that.
Right.
So if you didn't go there, you're not getting to her why, for sure.
Exactly.
Their why.
It's a great, I like that. We have to get to their why. I like that. It's true. Why are they here? They're, she's, coming for a second opinion. She's looking for something different.
Yep. She absolutely was looking for something different.
Oh, that's
because if she was happy with how things were going, she'd have stayed there.
Exactly.
But she was beginning to understand that, every time and it's not really, I'm doing it, but here's the other piece. It's not really helping.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she had already come to that conclusion. You didn't have to explain that to her or tell her, she already had come, she was already out of that, way into the contemplative stage. Like, this isn't working. Where do I need to go and what do I need to do? Because this is no longer serving or never really served my why.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Fantastic.
Cool. That's
Thank
it,
you
everybody.
for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And we're in the process of uploading our PDFs. I think by the time this airs, I think it'll all be done onto the toughtotreat.com website. So I know people who are on our list. We're going to be sending you a few more emails and things like that, some goodies that we have going forward, whether it's PDFs or just some clinical pearls that we'll send out, because we're going to be launching our mastermind at some point over the next few months, and it'd be a great opportunity for anybody who listens to the podcast or anybody to get involved. So look for some emails regarding that. And anything else you want to announce, Susan? Any of your courses or anything?
I will be, let's see, by the time this airs will be sometime in April. I will actually, by the time I think we get close to this airing, I'm going to be on my way to England.
Nice.
I'm participating and speaking at the Women on Fire conference with Jenny Burrell and Michelle Lyons.
Nice.
So I'm looking forward to that at the end of April. So that's going to be exciting.
Cool.
And I'll be teaching in Seattle, Toronto, and Dallas coming up in May and June. So you can always look to my website and see where I am, or if you want to join me on a course, come find me. The information's there.
Cool.
All right.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.